I got married in a psychotic episode to a man that I had only known for 2 weeks. I wasn't very safe during that episode. It was my worst one, and before meeting him, I was actually homeless. He took advantage of my vulnerable situation and let me stay with him. After a week of being together, he proposed. He got down on one knee and asked me to marry him. I didn't know if it was real, so I asked him to do it again and again. It turns out it was the most real thing that happened to me during that episode. He planned our wedding over the course of the next week, and I had very little involvement. He didn't want me making any decisions, so I got to pick out a dress from the thrift store. I think it was $7, and it wasn't even a wedding dress. I got us 2 little wire rings from the co-op that were $11 each, and I think those were, maybe aside from the certificate, the most expensive things that we purchased for our wedding. I didn't have any other say beyond that. He wouldn't let me have my family there. He wouldn't let me have any friends there. I wasn't allowed to tell anyone. I had to keep our marriage a secret. We didn't even have any witnesses, so we had to forge the signatures on our wedding certificate. The wedding itself lasted about 10 minutes long, and it was officiated by a man that neither of us had ever met before, who was found on Craigslist. He described himself as a biker Santa, and that's how we knew to find him in the parking lot. So it was perfunctory and not romantic at all. There were no pictures or videos of any kind. Maybe there's one picture from that day, but I don't want to look at it. I was utterly disappointed. From my perspective, it was a much different affair. Rewinding back to the proposal, I, again, didn't know that it was real. And at the time, I felt sort of pressured into marrying him because I thought that there were demons after my soul and that he would protect me if I was married to him because he was a god. I was in absolutely no shape to be making decisions on my own behalf. I was in no shape to be making life decisions or legal decisions. And legally, I actually was not able to consent to that marriage. It was an illegitimate marriage. The marriage lasted 5 months, and it was the longest, hardest 5 months of my life. There was a lot of domestic violence, but what was worse than that was the gaslighting, because when you're already psychotic, it's hard enough believing in reality, and then someone tries to change your reality. You're very susceptible to falling for it. It's so easy to gaslight a psychotic person because they don't have a firm enough grip on reality as it is to discern what is real or not real for them. He had complete and total control over me. The only thing that got me out of his grip was when my family eventually found out that we were married. I don't remember why, but he finally let me tell my family that we were married, and they were shocked. They hadn't heard from me in months because he made me cut off communication with all of my loved ones. They didn't know who this guy was. They thought I was still with my last boyfriend, and this was just shocking to everyone. It was devastating. No one knew how to take the news, but everybody was pretty upset by it. I finally got a chance to be alone with my family, and it was while I was coming out of the episode, so I was starting to be aware that I was in fact married and that it was a big deal. And my family very carefully told me, "You're in trouble. You need help. You can get out of this. We'll help you." My dad's a lawyer, and he told me that I could get an annulment. Thank God, because I fit the terms for getting an annulment. And typically it's not easy to get an annulment. You have to fit a certain criteria. You have to be in some sort of an illegitimate marriage, and the conditions are an incestual marriage, a polygamous marriage, a marriage under duress, what else? Marrying a minor, and in my case, mental incapacitation. I had been hospitalized during my marriage, and I had a 23-page document from that hospitalization proving that I had been mentally incapacitated when I got married. So I went through the process of getting the annulment. And in court, after looking at the document, the judge turned to my ex-husband and he said, "How could you have possibly thought this woman was fit to be married?" And my husband told him, "I just thought she was quirky." I succeeded in getting my annulment, and I subsequently got a no contact order against him, which he promptly violated within a couple of weeks. So I am actually still dealing with the legal consequences of that marriage. People tend to think that people with psychosis are violent or dangerous. They think that we're killers, or we'll assault you, or we'll attack you. When in fact, when it comes to psychosis, the people who face the most violence are those with psychosis. We are a vulnerable community and receive far more violence than we inflict. It is more rare for a psychotic person to perform a violent act than it is for them to receive one, and I think I am living proof of that. This is a follow-up video to a video I made about a week ago in which I talked about my marriage that took place while I was in a psychotic episode and the abuse that followed. I made that video as a way of showing that people with psychosis are often at a higher risk of receiving violence than they are of inflicting it, and ultimately my marriage resulted in a lot of violence. What I didn't expect was maybe 100 or so people responding that this scenario, this exact thing that I went through, happened to them too. I can't lie, with every new comment that I got from a person saying that they'd been through this, my heart broke more and more and more. It's devastating and it shouldn't have happened to anyone. But what was just as irksome was the comments I got from ignorant people who clearly didn't understand exactly what happened in that scenario. I got all sorts of comments saying things like, "You should have seen the red flags, you should have known better, you should take accountability and responsibility for your part in what happened, and even it wasn't your husband's fault." Here's the thing about psychosis. It is a culmination of symptoms resulting in a loss of touch with reality. There is no differentiating between your perception of what is real and what is actually really happening when you're in psychosis. When your sense of what's real doesn't align with normal reality, you can't tell with certainty what's going on. So you can't know better when you don't know what's happening at all. It's not possible to see things like red flags when your experience is so far from what's real. Red flags aren't real to you. Red flags don't even exist. Much like very real things that are in reality, like people and buildings, don't exist to you. You may be able to touch them, they may be solid, like you could hug a person, but they might not be real to you, much like your hallucination of someone that's not real is absolutely with certainty real. When a person is in psychosis, their sense of what's real is so abstract that to anyone else it would seem incomprehensible. But for those of us who experience psychosis, that's how we see other people's reality too. As far as taking accountability for my part, I do in fact have a part in how my psychosis and subsequent marriage played out. I stopped taking my meds. I didn't think I would go psychotic, but nonetheless, I did put myself in the position for that to happen. I am responsible for that action because I had control over it. I had enough sense to make that choice. Beyond that, whatever happened in psychosis was out of my control. What I mean when I say I had no control is that legally I was mentally incapacitated. There was confusion over that with my last video. It is a legal term. It is not ableist. It refers to what happened to me, which is an inability through mental illness or significant cognitive impairment to carry on the everyday affairs of life or to care for one's person or property with reasonable discretion. If that sounds anything like psychosis to you, you might be onto something. I was not able to take care of myself in the manner that I would have had I been stable, and this put me in the vulnerable situation in which I ended up receiving care from a person that I would not have otherwise trusted. Like the definition said, I didn't have reasonable discretion. Along those lines, my ex-husband is not blameless. He was cognizant of what was going on. He knew what he was getting into. He knew that I wasn't well. It was obvious. I was in the hospital. He was there for all of it. To say that he is not to blame and that it's not fair and it's not his fault is an easy stance to take from someone who has never been in my position, who has never gone through the court process of getting an annulment and being told in the eyes of the law that legally I did not consent. Consent laws don't just apply to SA. They apply to any legal matter in which a person is incapacitated, inebriated, underage, other reasons. There's a lot of ways that a person can't consent to more than just sex. It's easy to judge something you don't know and to victim blame a person that you've seen on the internet for 5 minutes without any other context. It can be harder to step outside of your own perspective to consider someone else's. I think though, in the case of people in vulnerable communities, just let them speak for themselves and be heard. Anyway, this video goes out to all of the people who commented on the last one about how they could relate because they had been in a similar situation, or they had been exactly in my shoes and had been married, or even knew someone that had been through this situation themselves. I'm sorry that I couldn't comment back to all of you, but my heart goes out to every single one of you. It's a shame that we all have that in common and that we've been carrying that alone individually, but hopefully together we can find some solace in sharing what we've experienced. Have you ever been in denial of a diagnosis even when the signs are glaringly obvious? It took me 10 or 11 years and 3 separate psychotic episodes before I could concede to myself that I actually had a psychotic disorder. I don't know why, but for some reason, all of the experiences that I very vividly remember, that I viscerally experienced, just went right over my head once I'd recovered. Now, I know part of the issue is that I was misdiagnosed pretty early on. I think I was maybe like 15 or 16 years old when I was misdiagnosed as bipolar type 2. And not long after that diagnosis, I did start going into my first psychotic episode, which went unnoticed by everyone. Like, I was the only person that could tell something wrong was happening, and no one believed me. So I did end up going to the hospital and getting put on meds and came out of the episode and had pretty much been gaslit by everyone into thinking that it wasn't real. So I ultimately just disregarded the experience. I was stable on meds for a few years until in my early 20s, I saw a new psychiatrist who should not have a license, and as a result of crazy malpractice, he sent me into a psychotic episode by the medications he was prescribing me. He had me over-medicated on a heart medication, a nightmare medication, antipsychotic, anti-anxiety, antidepressant, mood stabilizer. I think I was taking about 10 pills a day, and I thought I was going to have a heart attack. It resulted in a psychotic break, which ultimately was a lot worse than the first one, and that was when it became apparent to people that I did have psychosis, and I got properly diagnosed with schizoaffective disorder. The thing is, I don't remember being diagnosed as schizoaffective. I don't know who told me or when they told me or how they told me, because I don't have recollection of that. I'm sure I was told, and it had to be retold to me quite a few times before it sunk in that I had a new diagnosis, and it was called schizoaffective, but beyond that, I really didn't register it. Like, when I was told in a psychotic state that I had this new disorder, it made no sense to me, and I didn't remember a word of it. And then I recovered, and it's almost as if once I was of sound mind again, the experience just completely vanished from my mind. I'm sure I didn't forget it, but on an intellectual level, I had erased it, and I didn't feel connected to it. I didn't feel connected to the diagnosis. I didn't even remember to say that that was the diagnosis. I was telling people that I had bipolar type 2, and I went about my life thinking that I was fine, that I would always be fine, that this would never happen again, and it didn't really matter because it was over. I got a little reckless. I'm not gonna lie, I stopped taking my meds. I guess I thought I was fine. I think that's a common thing that people do. They think that they're better, they think that they're fine, and they don't need their meds. They stop taking them, and then the symptoms come back. I went back into a psychotic episode, and this one was my very worst. This was the one where I wound up homeless, wound up marrying a stranger, wound up having to recover for 18 months, relearning how to talk and read. It was pretty cemented after that. After that, I realized this is so fucking serious. I had never taken it seriously before. And after that, I was like, it is certain I have schizoaffective. You know what's crazy? I think that if I hadn't had that third episode, I probably would have continued on feeling like totally fine. This will never happen again. This was a fluke. This isn't normal. I'm just never gonna go psychotic again because I'm bipolar. I would have continued thinking that way if it hadn't been so bad that reality slapped me in the face. It would be easy to lament that I wish my life hadn't gone this way. Aside from the psychotic episodes, I also have CPTSD from childhood trauma and continued abuse throughout adulthood, and the ride hasn't stopped. Like, even though I'm not psychotic, I still struggle with my mental illness to a severe degree every day. I'm okay with my life though. I'm proud of my life. I'm glad that I moved to Washington. I wouldn't have done that if I hadn't gone psychotic. I'm glad that I found the community I have in recovery. I wouldn't be sober if I hadn't gone psychotic. I wouldn't have met my fiance if I hadn't gone psychotic. I wouldn't have had his support through my last episode to save me from a much worse fate if none of this ever happened. I guess the silver lining is that I have had a full, colorful life. I am only 30, and in my lifetime, I have achieved so much, I've lost so much, I've seen so much, I've felt so much. I have a fuller life than a lot of people around me, and I don't take that for granted because as painful as it has been worth it. You know how in Psychosis you can't tell what's real and not real because that's the nature of psychosis? Even when I've recovered and I'm stable and I'm not actively psychotic, I sometimes still can't tell what was real and what was not real. Part of this, I think, is because I have a foggy memory of the events of what happened, and I can't really recall certain details. I can't remember things like accurately because they were filtered through delusions and hallucinations and this perception that what I was experiencing was entirely different. So if I could parse through that filter, I might be able to pick out things that happened that were actually this way and not the way I perceived it, if that makes any sense. My memories are basically coded in this film of deception that I have to try to get through. I guess what I mean is that things that actually happened went one way, and how I remember it was so far from that someone who shared a memory with me had an entirely different experience that I'm still trying to understand. As an example, let's say I was talking to my best friend and she was telling me about the plans we were going to make, about how we were going to go to Red Robin for dinner to eat burgers. But me, in my psychosis, I'm sifting through all of what she's saying to look for hidden messages, and what she's saying to me, which is just our evening plans, to me comes across as like this dire situation, and we're going to go on a mission to a place called Burger to steal a Red Robin. So we had different conversations, and now that I'm remembering it accurately, I'm seeing through that film, that filter, that it was an entirely different situation. Also, I can't always tell looking back if what happened was a hallucination, because some hallucinations are just really casual and they're not some big exciting thing. They're literally just like a sentence coming from someone in their voice when I can't see that they're talking. For instance, my sister took me home from the hospital one time and I was walking into the apartment behind her, so I couldn't see her mouth to make sure of what she was saying. And she was saying, here, I put some flowers on the table and I hooked up the DVD player and I was going to light the couch on fire. And I remember when she said that it irked me, and I thought, did she really say that? And I just like brushed it off because I was too embarrassed to address it. But I wondered for years if she'd actually said that. I'm trying to accept that she probably didn't say that, but it was real enough that I still wonder. Even people that I've met, I doubt if they were even actually people. And I would like have full-on relationships with these people that I've never seen again, so I don't know if they were real. I was in the hospital one time and there was this other patient and his name was Joseph, and we would talk at night looking out of the window together. Like we'd stand in front of the window and I'd see his reflection in the window, but I never like directly looked at him. And he would tell me all sorts of stuff about how he was an angel sent from God and he was from a lineage of warriors and stuff like that. And honestly, in that context, like in a hospital where other people are psychotic, I don't know if that really happened. It felt so real, but I can't tell if that guy actually existed. This guy said some really weird stuff to me, but it was crazy how real he seemed. Maybe he was, I don't know. It's easy to sit like right on the precipice between with definite certainty this happened and I don't know, man, it's plausible, but we don't know for sure. I'm trying to just accept at this point that I probably will never know all the answers. I will never know what was real and what was not real. I just have to be okay with the fact that I will never know certain things. I will always be confused. It's just how it is.